The flashing blue lights in his rearview mirror felt like a bad omen. He had done nothing wrong. No speeding, no broken lights, just another night driving home. But as he slowed down, something inside him whispered that this was not going to end the way it should. The air felt heavy, the silence before the storm, and then came the first gunshot. Marcus Hall had learned to read danger before it fully revealed itself. It was a skill drilled into him during his years in the army, a survival instinct that had saved his life more than once. Tonight, that same instinct whispered to him the moment he noticed the flashing blue lights filling his rearview mirror. He wasn't speeding. His taillights worked. He wasn't swerving or breaking any law. It was just another quiet drive home from his late shift. At the mechanic shop, still, his gut tightened, and his hands gripped the steering wheel a little harder. He slowed, pulled over to the side of the empty road, and took a deep breath. Through the mirror, he saw two police officers step out of the cruiser. Their movements were quick, tense to tense, for what should have been a routine stop. One officer's hand rested on his holster. The other's fingers flexed nervously around a flashlight. Marcus lowered his window halfway, keeping his hands visible on the wheel, just as he had been taught in countless What to Do If You're Stopped talks back home. The officers didn't approach slowly like normal. Instead, one shouted something Marcus couldn't fully hear over the roar of a passing truck, and before he could even respond, the night exploded with the sound of gunfire. A bullet tore through the windshield, spraying shards of glass across. His lap instinct overrode shock. He ducked low, adrenaline flooding his veins, every muscle tense with survival. Why are they shooting? His mind screamed, but there was no time for questions. Another round shattered the driver's side mirror. The air smelled of hot metal and burnt powder, stinging his nose. His training took over scan for cover, assess the threat, react. But there was no cover. He was a target in plain sight. His heart pounded so loud it nearly drowned out the gunshots. He raised his hands higher, shouting, "I'm unarmed, I'm not resisting." But the words were swallowed by chaos. Something in his chest shifted, fear giving way to that cold, calculated calm that soldiers know when death feels inches away. He reached for the small handgun stored under his seat, a weapon he carried legally but never wanted to use. The grip felt heavy, familiar, and in that moment, it was no longer about right or wrong, it was about surviving. Another bullet whistled past his head, close enough for him to feel the heat of it. His mind flashed to dusty roads in Afghanistan. 2 nights where ambushes came without warning, to the faces of brothers in arms who hadn't made it home. He aimed, not to kill, but to stay alive, firing a single shot toward the darkness where the muzzle flashes came from. The ringing in his ears was deafening. The gunfire paused, replaced by shouts and the sound of boots pounding pavement. Marcus's breathing was fast, shallow. He knew this night had already changed everything. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't be going home the same man who had left work just 20 minutes earlier. Marcus's ears still rang from the gunfire, the high-pitched whine blending with the pounding of his heartbeat. His breathing came in sharp, shallow bursts, each inhale carrying the acrid temps of burnt gunpowder and dust from shattered glass. For a moment, time felt fractured, like the world had slowed to a strange, unbearable stillness. Then it snapped back. Shouts tore through the air, quick and frantic, the officers' voices blending into a blur of orders and curses. Marcus could make out the sound of metal being racked, a shotgun maybe, followed by the crunch of boots on broken glass. He tightened his grip on his handgun, his knuckles pale, his arms trembling not from fear alone but from the surge of adrenaline coursing through him. In his mind he replayed the last few seconds over and over, searching for logic, for a reason why 2 armed men in uniforms had opened fire without warning. Nothing made sense. He thought about putting the gun down, but the thought of lowering his only protection while bullets had just been flying at him felt like stepping into the open in a war zone. A sudden beam of light cut through the shattered windshield, blinding him. He turned his face away. Instincts firing, never give your position away. Never let them see you vulnerable. A voice shouted again, demanding he exit the vehicle with his hands raised. But the way the command was barked, the fury in the tone, made it sound less like an order for surrender and more like a prelude to another shot. His mind split between 2 paths: comply and risk being gunned down in the open, or hold position and be branded a threat. The weight of that impossible choice pressed down on him harder than the air itself. His phone buzzed somewhere on the passenger seat, the faint glow of the screen showing his sister's name. He couldn't reach for it. He couldn't move an inch without possibly setting off another hail of bullets. He thought of her face, of the promise he'd made years ago to come home safe, no matter the mission. The sound of sirens drew closer, now a swarm of new arrivals racing toward the scene. More vehicles screeched to a stop, doors slammed, radios crackled. Marcus realized with cold certainty that every arriving officer had already heard armed suspect shots fired over dispatch. Whatever truth there was before, it was buried now beneath the weight of perception. He was the suspect, they were the law, and the gulf between those two realities was as wide as any battlefield he had ever known. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging, but he didn't blink. He kept his focus sharp, every muscle tight, waiting for the next move. Then, without warning, Another voice cut through the chaos louder, steadier, almost commanding the others to hold their fire. It was the first sound in the night that didn't feel like a threat. And for the first time since it began, Marcus dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone out there was willing to listen before pulling the trigger again. The steady voice cut through the noise like a lifeline, and Marcus turned his head slightly toward it, straining to see who it belonged to. In the glare of flashing lights, he made out the silhouette of a tall officer stepping forward, one hand raised toward his own colleagues as if to physically hold back their trigger fingers. The man's other hand gripped a loudspeaker, his tone calm but firm, a stark contrast to the raw aggression that had filled the air moments earlier. "Marcus Hall," the officer called out, pronouncing his name slowly, like he'd studied. "But before arriving, I know who you are. I know your service record. I want to end this without anyone else getting hurt." The words sent a strange jolt through Marcus, not trust exactly, but a sliver of recognition that someone out there saw more than just a suspect. His mind raced. How did this man know his name? Was it a tactic to lower his guard? Still, the difference in tone was undeniable. The other officers hovered at the edges, their weapons still trained on the car, eyes sharp and unblinking. Every movement Marcus made felt like it could decide his fate. He loosened his grip on the gun, not lowering it completely, but easing the tension in his fingers. "They shot first," he called out, his voice hoarse from adrenaline. I stopped. I had my hands up. The words cracked in the night air, fragile but loud enough to carry. The officer nodded once, like he'd heard and believed him, but he didn't take his eyes off Marcus. "I believe you," he said, "but right now, I need you to put the weapon down so I can make sure you live through this." A car door slammed somewhere to Marcus's left, and the sudden movement made him flinch, his heartbeat spiking again. He glanced toward the sound. Two more officers had taken cover behind a patrol car, rifles angled toward his chest. His mind split between the calm voice in front of him and the looming threat at his flank. The veteran in him assessed the angles, the distances, the timing. One wrong move from anyone here, and it would all be over in seconds. "I'm not the enemy," Marcus said, louder this time, forcing the words to cut through the tension. "But I'm not dying out here either." The calm officer took another step closer, his hands visible, his own weapon still holstered. The surrounding officers tensed, but he ignored them. "Then help me make sure that doesn't happen," he replied. "Let me walk you out of there." For the first time all night, Marcus felt the thin possibility of a way out that involved more bullets. His breathing slowed just enough for him to think clearly, to weigh the risk of lowering his guard against the greater risk of staying frozen in this steel trap. Somewhere deep down, under the layers of training and fear, the soldier in him recognized the faintest signal of a ceasefire. But he also knew, from experience, that ceasefires could be broken with the smallest mistake. Marcus kept his eyes locked on the officer who had stepped forward. The one thread of calm in a storm of flashing lights and steel muzzles. His fingers flexed around the grip of his handgun, every instinct screaming to stay armed, to stay ready. But another voice, quieter, deeper, pushed through his thoughts. It was the same voice that had kept him alive overseas, the one that whispered when to hold fire, when to wait, when to trust that not every hand reaching toward you was an enemy's. Slowly, he shifted his weight, his every movement deliberate, knowing a single twitch could trigger chaos. "I'm lowering it," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, hoping the declaration itself might keep a bullet from finding him. The calm officer gave the smallest nod, his hand still visible, his eyes never leaving Marcus's. Marcus bent forward, setting the gun down gently on the cracked asphalt beside his car. The metallic clink echoed louder than it should have, the sound hanging in the air like a fragile truce. The moment his hands came back into view, a rush of movement erupted. 3 officers closed in, weapons still raised, their voices overlapping in a blur of commands. "Hands behind your head. Step out. Step out now." He moved slowly, obeying each order, feeling the cold night air bite at his skin as he emerged from the shattered shell of his car. The calm officer stepped between him and the others, signaling them to ease their aim. "Is compliant. Stand down," he barked, and though the rifles didn't lower entirely, the suffocating tension seemed to loosen just a fraction. Marcus stood still, hands laced behind his head, glass crunching under his boots. His mind replayed the start of the night, how normal it had been, how quickly it had turned into something else entirely. As an officer cuffed him, the metal biting into his wrists, Marcus caught the calm one's gaze. There was no triumph in those eyes, no smugness, only something that looked like quiet exhaustion. "You're going to be all right," the officer said under his breath, as if he wasn't sure it was true but needed Marcus to hear it anyway. The words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like a coin toss. Marcus didn't resist when they led him toward the waiting cruiser. He didn't speak when they read him his rights, each sentence falling like a stone, somewhere deep in his chest. He knew that no matter what the investigation uncovered, no matter how many dashcam angles or witness statements, the headlines would never match the truth he had lived. As the car door closed and the outside world shrank to a narrow strip of night through the window, he exhaled slowly, trying to steady his pulse. He was alive. That was the only victory tonight had given him. But he also knew that surviving the bullets was only the beginning. The real battle, the one for his name, his story, his life as he knew it, was still ahead, waiting in the cold light of morning. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Black Struggle on YouTube for more powerful real stories that need to be heard.